This is Embodied from PRX and WUNC. I'm Anita Rao. In the 2000s, Kaila Yu built a career on an image she didn't really question: a hypersexualized Asian American woman.
When pursuing pinup modeling, I was just doing what I saw around me, and it was very normalized in the world I was in. But now we see the objectification of women does really lead to violence in many scenarios.
Kaila's now in her 40s with a new memoir that reckons with her own fetishization and its costs. That conversation, plus a sociologist on the long history behind the hypersexualized Asian woman trope.
This is how Hollywood depicted Asian women through this lens of the prostitute, of the war bride. Very much historically, this has definitely been the lens through which Asian women have been viewed, and that continues on to this day.
That conversation just ahead on Embodied. In the early 2000s, Kaila Yu made a name for herself as a pinup model and singer. She was an it girl in the import car scene and cameoed in one of the Fast and Furious movies.
Daddy.
She also got big on MySpace and co-founded the all-female pop rock band Nylon Pink. In that era, she leaned into a hypersexualized image. And for most of her life, she didn't really think twice about it.
Honestly, when I look back on my 2000s modeling and pinup stuff, I looked back at it fondly, like, oh, that fun, crazy time.
But during the pandemic, when Kaila was in her early 40s and working as a culture writer, her feelings about her past started to shift.
Then, around that time, so much Asian hate was happening. So I started covering more of these issues. And then about a year later, the Asian spa shootings happened in Atlanta.
Out of Georgia tonight, and I have to warn you, it is disturbing news, and this is a developing story.
March 16th, a total of 8 innocent lives were violently taken by the hands of one lone killer.
Police say suspect Robert Long has confessed his bizarre explanation: he's a sex addict, not a racist, and killed his victims to eliminate a temptation.
On March 16th, 2021, a young white gunman who said he was struggling with a sex addiction killed 8 people at spas in the Atlanta area. 6 of the 8 victims were Asian women.
When me and my friends heard those details at the time, we kind of knew immediately that it was like sexually charged in some way. But I think we felt really gaslit because the media has never recognized it as a sexual or a hate crime.
That incident and the public discourse around it brought images and moments from Kaila's past flooding to the surface.
Just realizing that I did lean very much into the Asian fetish when I was younger, when I saw it benefited me, but it didn't seem like there was actual violence attached. And I think that's the moment when I started reflecting back on that, and I had never really reflected on it before.
This is Embodied, our show about sex, relationships, and your health. I'm Anita Rao. After the Atlanta spa shootings, Kaila began to interrogate the forces that shaped her life and career, and started asking herself some hard questions, like how the hypersexualization of Asian women has impacted her identity, and what role she's played in perpetuating harmful stereotypes. She wrestles with these questions in her recent memoir, Fetishized. That story starts when she was a child, growing up in a suburb of LA. So you are the child of Taiwanese immigrants. You grew up in Upland, California, which is a suburb about an hour east of LA. And when you were a kid in the 80s and 90s, Upland was about 4% Asian. So I'm curious to know about the role models you had for Asian American womanhood growing up in your community, in popular culture, what you were exposed to.
I think the only role model was my mother or other more popular Asian girls that at my school, elementary school. I think Connie Chung was on TV, but I wasn't really paying attention to her. I think I was too young to be watching the news. So I can't even remember anyone when I was in elementary school.
What kind of messages did you get from your mom or your dad about kind of what it meant to be a girl, what role and responsibilities you had?
Well, it's interesting because my mom's a tiger mom. So she's very strong. She runs a household. She very much believed in education and like for me to get a very high-powered career and earn my money. But then there's another kind of more nuanced message happening at home that I didn't notice at the time. And she told me later that she does everything at home for my dad. And my dad wasn't involved at all with childcare. So I think that was happening in the background, even though she was a very powerful woman in her own right.
So you mentioned Connie Chung, this like woman that you knew about in theory, but not really up close. You had your mom. There was this kind of dearth of representation of Asian American women for a large part of your childhood and adolescence. But then in 1997, the book Memoirs of a Geisha came out, something that I also read in high school. And for anyone who doesn't remember this book or its movie adaptation, it's about a young girl becoming a geisha in the 1930s and 40s in Japan. And you were really captivated by this story. You say that you read it over and over again. Tell me about how it struck you.
I mean, I love that book. It was kind of like the Cinderella story, right? A very, very twisted one. um, like we didn't notice at the time, or I didn't notice at the time, she's just basically a child sold into slavery by the book's telling. But there, it's just all about how this girl who's kind of a pauper enters this glamorous world and is transformed to the most famous geisha of all the land. It was very mesmerizing for me at the time.
The book is historical fiction. It's written by a white man, but you said you kind of read it as like a guidebook of seduction. So I'm curious about what messages really spoke to you from the book, kind of what you internalized about beauty and like male attraction.
Yeah, so this was like a book that was written as if like, here's this world of Japanese women that exist only for men. Like their only goal in life is to entertain and strategize how to be the most popular amongst the men. And in exchange, they would, be taken care of and receive renown and attention. And then at the time, I was very shy and nerdy, and no boys paid any attention to me. So the book literally walks you through like, oh, this is how you pour your tea by showing your wrist slightly to titillate the man. Or there's like one part where the elder geisha tells the younger geisha, like, a true geisha can stop a man in his tracks with just one flick of her eye. And it just seemed so empowering when I felt very powerless.
So you kind of had this like, okay, there's this version of a girl, of a flirt that I want to be, but I'm probably not that girl. But then kind of later in high school, you came across an image of a Korean-American pinup model, Sung-hee Lee, who was the first Asian model to ever be solo on the cover of Playboy. Take me back to seeing her image for the first time.
Yeah, I remember sitting in class and one of my friends just slid me a flyer and she was on the cover. And I mean, this was around the time I think I was watching a lot of like Sports Illustrated swimsuit specials and seeing these beautiful, mostly white women dressed up in lingerie and swimsuits. And this is the first time seeing an Asian woman dressed up like that too, which I never thought was a thing, I guess, until that moment. And my friend was so enamored by her and in awe of her. And I wanted that kind of attention too.
How did that land for you at the time, seeing that as a high schooler?
I was fascinated and obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
Like I started to collect all her photos and I started to kind of just, when she launched a members website, which I'm sure was like 95% men, I joined as a member. Like I just followed her like a super fan. I just made her my role model, I guess, because there was no other role models that kind of fit. I can't even think this was before Lucy Liu was even on TV. So really there weren't any role models that I can think of.
I remember those kind of early experiences in like high school where you have these role models and they're like, okay, they're older than you, but they're not that much older. And so I at least had these conflicting thoughts of like, could my body look like that if I tried? Or could I be that, beautiful if I learned how to do my makeup that way? Like, how did kind of becoming a fan of hers shift your own thoughts about your body and about beauty?
Yeah, it's interesting. Around that time, not too far later, I met another Asian girl at my high school who kind of took me under her wing. And she was very glamorous and beautiful. And she kind of made me over, kind of like Clueless, really. But I learned how to like pluck out all my eyebrows like we did back then, pluck them all out and draw them in again in a skinny line. And then overline our lips with like Max Spice lip liner and draw them in. And then I started like changing my dress to be a little more revealing than before. And then she would take me out at night when we would sneak out and meet these gangster boys from towns over. And then I would get a little bit of attention. So yeah, I slowly started to morph and change, probably from the influence of Sung-hee Lee some and also from this influence of this new friend.
So this is like late 90s, early 2000s. You're transitioning from high school to college. How much weight did this male attention have for you at that time? Like, did it feel like a big focus or something kind of in the background?
I think it was everything. I mean, I grew up with a very kind father who was completely kind of silent to us. Like he was there always physically, but he didn't really speak to us. And for me, I think I am somebody whose love language is a lot of verbal affirmation. And I never really got that at home. And I was really boy crazy in high school. Like I had crushes on boys and dreamed of having a boyfriend and just nobody ever asked me out. So when I got to college and got a boyfriend immediately, it was like everything I wanted.
Just ahead, we'll get some context for why so many of Kaila's formative role models for Asian femininity were sexualized, and how that shaped the image Kaila started to portray as a model, actress, and singer. You're listening to Embodied from WUNC, a broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. You can also hear Embodied as a podcast. Follow and subscribe on your platform of choice. We'll be right back. This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. Today, we're talking about the fetishization of Asian women and how one Taiwanese-American former model is reckoning with the cultural forces that shaped her career and identity. Kaila Yu grew up in the 80s and 90s, and her role models for Asian womanhood were limited. She learned about the power of beauty from the book Memoirs of a Geisha, which was written by a white man. And she dreamed of having a body like Sung-hee Lee, a Korean-American Playboy model. What Kaila didn't know at that time was that the hypersexualization of Asian women has a long history that's been studied by sociologists like Nancy Wong Yun.
So when I think about the hypersexualization of Asian women, it's complicated. While women, I think in general, are hypersexualized, when I talk about and think about Asian women being hypersexualized, there's an added layer of racialized misogyny.
Nancy studies Hollywood and pop culture with a particular eye toward Asian American representation. And she has a long list of examples of the hypersexual Asian woman trope.
Maybe the quintessential person would be Madame Butterfly, which was an Italian opera character and then became a film character. And she's the kind of geisha who falls in love with an American GI or Western GI and then tragically sacrifices herself for the GI to kind of fulfill his love story. And so this is a very common, I think, fantasy of Asian women in terms of the kind of exoticism and the subservient, sexually submissive hyperfeminization. And then relatedly is the Asian prostitute, like Full Metal Jacket that came out in 1987, the Stanley Kubrick film. That film, I think, has really done a lot of damage for Asian women in general. And this is where, when people ask me, does Hollywood matter? It's just pop culture. What does it matter? Well, there was a very, very small role of a Vietnamese prostitute who propositions these American GIs and says, me so horny, me love you long time. And there are countless Asian women, especially East and Southeast Asian women, who have been catcalled on the streets, me myself included, at a Atlanta airport, where people just see us and they'll just say, me so horny, me love you long time.
Nancy, like Kaila, was a young Asian American woman in the 90s and 2000s. But unlike Kaila, she was exposed to a greater breadth of stories about Asian womanhood beyond those from American popular culture and Hollywood.
I actually worked in Blockbuster in the 90s as a young person, and I was, for the first time, I think, exposed to Hong Kong films. So the 90s were actually also a great time for Wong Kar-wai films, and I was watching In the Mood for Love and Chungking Express. And it's so interesting because those star women who were really romantic leads, but they were coming out of Asia, right? They weren't Asian American or Hollywood depictions. So, and then you see Memoirs of a Geisha. It's like, okay, protagonist, but only as a sexual object. And also Rush Hour 2, I think, came out around that time, where Jackie Chan was a huge star. And I was, really excited to see movies with him. And then they go to an Asian spa, and the kind of paper doors slide open, and it's this entire harem of Asian women. And it was so disturbing, right, to see Asian women on display as prostitutes associated with Asian spa and completely objectified. And so that was the kind of landscape where Hollywood only saw Asian women that way, or only depicted us that way. And to have to go from teenager to young adulthood in that climate, it's really hard because it's not relatable to me, but I certainly was propositioned, especially by white men, through that lens.
Kaila was also pursued and propositioned because of these stereotypes. But when she first started seeking out modeling opportunities in college, it was the early internet era. So she didn't always know what she was getting into until she showed up at a photo shoot.
I had no idea how to get into modeling. Like, there's no rule book for that, and especially back then. So I just, literally opened up the school newspaper and started looking at want ads there. And I'd start going to these super sketchy casting shoots, often with middle-aged men. And the first ones I went to were perfectly fine. Nobody tried anything. So it seemed kind of safe and normalized that these test shoots or auditions were at men's houses. I kept looking in ads in the school newspaper, and the next one I encountered wasn't so great. But this man showed me a bunch of Playboys and high-end, glossy calendars, and he was like, yeah, I cast for these magazines. And those were the very magazines that I wanted to be in. And then we scheduled a test shoot for some time later. And when I showed up at the test shoot, it was at his apartment. And I don't remember that much from the shoot, but I remember just feeling weird. So what happened at that quote unquote test shoot was that I was coerced into performing sexual acts that I did not want to do or consent to do. And I was a virgin at the time with a boyfriend, and I hadn't done some of these acts with my own boyfriend yet. And I just remember distinctly when I had been asked if I wanted to do anything more extreme, I said, absolutely not. And I was not asked in this circumstance. And I did not feel safe. And I left, and I just never told it. I didn't tell my boyfriend. I didn't tell anybody what happened. I feel like I had to have dissociated while I was in that room to not remember so much of it, because a video was produced from this experience. And later on, I watched the video just because I wanted to know what was available in the world. And I don't remember, most of it.
You've said before that you feel like this video was your first experience of feeling like you were being fetishized as an Asian woman. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, the video was a fetish video, as in it was like the style is like a girl shows up to an audition and then the director coerces her to do much more, which is pretty much exactly what happened. But it was Asian themed. So there were like 5 other Asian women in my VHS tape.
Okay. And did you know that at the time that you were filming, or not until you saw it after the fact?
I did not know it while I was filming. Yeah, I don't know if I recognized, like, when I was in the room that it was anything fetishy, because I don't think he did say some things, yeah. One part of the Asian fetish is that men will speak about Asian women's tightness. So he focused on that a lot.
After that traumatic experience, Kaila took a break from modeling. She says that for a while, her life was defined by dissociation, going to raves, and doing a lot of ecstasy. But after a couple years, she decided to get back in front of the camera. She moved to LA and began working with a female photographer named Julie. But the stereotypes followed her. Many of her shoots involved dressing up, and she noticed that the Asian-themed photos were especially popular.
I'd dress up like as a firefighter or like a cute, innocent country girl, sometimes Asian themed, like I'd wear qipao or wear a kimono. And in a way, I was very proud of my Asianness, if we'll call it, but I very much wanted to pose in like Asian themed clothing. And later when I started posting that online, when I had a website with photo shoots, they were indeed very popular. So then that kind of reinforced wanting to do more of that.
So you started creating this site of your own. You were uploading photos to it. I'm curious about kind of your feelings of like empowerment and your relationship with your body at this juncture.
I don't know if I've ever felt like in my body. It felt like my body was a tool, like this tool that would help me get what I want at that point, as in I could pose in these photos that actually I really loved some of these photos that Julie shot, and I was proud to put them online, and that would lead to more magazines and calendars, and everybody was just trying to get more covers at the time because I wasn't in my body like sexually or feeling sexually connected. So there was still some kind of dissociation while being happy with my body, if that makes sense.
By this point in the early 2000s, Kaila was building her platform as a pinup model and eventually attracted the attention of her modeling idol, Seung-hee Lee. After being featured on Seung-hee's website, Kaila started getting invited to import car shows. If you don't know what I'm talking about, think Fast and Furious.
The car shows would be, say, 6 to 10 p.m., and it would be dark like a nightclub with strobe lights everywhere. And there would be DJs and dancers on stage. So it was like a party car show. And these became hugely popular.
The import scene emerged in the late 1980s among young Asian Americans in Southern California. They modified and showed off imported Japanese cars, and the subculture caught on. By the time Kaila started attending these car shows, they were drawing in crowds of tens of thousands of people. And at the time, those modeling opportunities were a positive feedback loop for the persona Kaila had created. Did you have experiences in that era of feeling like people wanted you to portray an image that maybe wasn't exactly what you wanted, or you were really having to like play a part of like a sexy Asian girl?
I don't know if anyone pressured me into that. I think it's like with social media, like you keep getting rewarded for doing certain things. So you keep doing that thing more and more. And I was very rewarded by like, oh, I'm being a sexy Asian girl, and now I'm getting flown all around the world to places I've never been and getting paid really good money for that time to do these things. And it doesn't seem like I'm doing anything wrong. Like this was in the early aughts.
Yeah.
So I kind of quote this in the book. It's what this feminist calls the raunch era in her book, Female Chauvinist Pigs. And this was a time where sexuality was celebrated. So we were like looking at the Paris Hiltons and the Pamela Andersons and Britney Spears. So this was just like what was aspirational at the time, even outside of being Asian. So it seemed very normal to want to pursue and be like these women.
Yeah, it's interesting because in reading that part of the book, I was really drawn back to the early 2000s and like thinking about Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera in this very sexualized era of pop stars and pop singers. But you say that like even though all of you guys were kind of swimming in the same water, you did feel a little bit more boxed in as an Asian woman. Tell me about that.
Well, yeah, it's just like I couldn't model anywhere beyond the import scene, really.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there weren't a lot that was my opportunity. So there was definitely a ceiling to what I could accomplish. And it wasn't mainstream. And then I started to kind of pursue acting around this time. And that really, really showed the box because pretty much every audition I went to was massage girl or prostitute or kung fu girl, which I couldn't qualify for because I didn't know any martial arts. So I was purely going for prostitute or massage girl.
Did you want those roles or you just wanted to be able to act?
I think everybody still wanted those roles.
Yeah.
Because we wanted, like, is one example that the audition I went to was for Rush Hour 2. And all the import models went to it and all of them wanted to be in it because it seems like such a big deal to be in a movie when you're like coming from these car shows. Is like a huge step up. And for those of you that don't remember the scene, it's just basically when Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan go up to this massage parlor and they open the doors dramatically and there's like 20 women who are the massage girl prostitutes pointing and like smiling at the camera. I didn't get the part because I wasn't good at flirting or, you know, doing that look. But a bunch of import models were in that scene and everyone was really excited about it. Nobody thought it was negative at the time.
Yeah. So you were dabbling in acting and then you also started getting interested in music. You debuted a solo album in 2003, and it was a pretty big leap from your sexualized pinup image. It was like a kind of a cutesy album.
Yeah.
Tell me about kind of what motivated this shift in aesthetic for you.
Well, now I felt a little bit empowered because I had some success in the import scene. And I also, like, we all had our mailing list during that time. And I had like probably 10,000 emails, which was decent for the time. And then we had our, I think, Friendsters, and we had our social media accounts, and I had my own website, which was getting a lot of traffic. So I felt like I had my own audience that I could launch things to. So then I think in my mind, I perceived that I didn't have to play into the stereotypes so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I can kind of like do a little bit more what was naturally me. And I came out with that album. It wasn't true because the album flopped, so nobody wanted that. Nobody wanted that innocent. It just didn't make any sense, really, right? If I've been like marketing this sexy image and suddenly I'm doing this random music career and it's not that. I think it was very confusing for the audience.
But at that time, it sounds like you still didn't really feel like that sexy girl was you.
Kaila's just like my alter ego. So it always felt like a character.
So when the album kind of flopped, like, how did that feel?
Yeah, it was highly disappointing. But I pivoted and just started leaning back into the sexuality a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Not as extreme as with the import modeling, but just eventually started showing a little bit more skin. And then, like, this was around the time MySpace launched. And I was one of the early people on MySpace and grew a really strong following on there. And a producer found me at that time. And he had some songs that were a good fit for me based on what he saw on my MySpace. And one of his songs was called Candy Coated Sugar Sex. And it was a really good beat. And of course, that's the song that takes off and gets millions and millions of views on MySpace. So it kind of reinforced that the sexiness is what works. I know what the girls like, candy-coated sugar.
Kaila's story really transports me back in time to the 2000s when we were all steeped in raunch culture. But for Asian women, the sexy but sweet stereotype had some additional layers that go back more than a century. Here's more from sociologist Nancy Wong Yoon.
So the history of hypersexualization of Asian women is longstanding in the United States. It goes back all the way to 1875 when the Page Act was this exclusionary act that said Chinese women couldn't immigrate here. The act actually stereotyped them as quote unquote lewd and immoral prostitutes. So this was actually codified into our law, which is very shocking to read. I didn't know this, of course, growing up as a teen, because U.S. history doesn't cover this stuff very detailed. And so finding this out makes perfect sense now why Asian women, especially East Asian, Southeast Asian women, have been seen since the beginnings. But of course, all the wars with Asia, from Korean War to Vietnam War, and then, of course, wars that took GIs to Japan as well. Just all the camps that were established around the bases, the military bases, had Asian prostitutes. And I think that a lot of the contact that U.S. GIs had with Asia became that stereotype, even though Asian women are not more likely to be involved in sex work than any other racial, ethnic, or national group, right? And then Hollywood then ran with that. There were so many films like Sayonara, which actually was the very first Oscar that went to an Asian actor, Miyoshi Umiki. She was a war bride, right? And there's a scene where she's like in a towel bathing her GI husband, and it's just very provocative. And I think to have the first Asian woman who wins an Oscar be hypersexualized, this is how Hollywood, depicted Asian women through this lens of the prostitute, of the war bride, kind of the spoils of war. Very much historically, this has definitely been the lens through which Asian women have been viewed, and that continues on to this day.
Just ahead, we'll talk about what's changed and what hasn't in the representation of Asian American women, and what folks like Nancy and Kaila are doing to change the conversation for future generations. Please stay with us.
Every day on Up First, NPR's Golden Globe-nominated morning news podcast, we bring you 3 essential stories. At the heart of each story are questions. What really happened? What really mattered? What happens next? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious and to follow the facts. Follow Up First wherever you get your podcasts and start your day knowing what matters and why.
This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. Today, we're talking about the hypersexualization of Asian women in U.S. culture and its real-life consequences. Taiwanese-American writer Kaila Yu leaned into the benefits of being a beautiful woman in her 20s and early 30s. As a model, actress, and singer, she played into a highly sexualized image that capitalized on the fetishization of Asian women. Now, as a travel and culture writer in her 40s, Kaila is examining the choices she made and the cultural pressures that shaped her identity. Kaila's moment of reckoning happened in 2021, after a white gunman shot and killed 8 people at Atlanta area spas. 6 of them were Asian women. While the shooter said he was motivated by a sex addiction, many people, including Kaila, connected the dots between this violence and the fetishization of Asian women. And all of that led Kaila to reflect on her own responsibility in perpetuating harmful stereotypes. I'm curious about, how much you personally feel like you need to take accountability and responsibility for, given that these are big cultural forces far beyond kind of just your one individual self.
Yeah, I come from a recovery background, as in I'm sober 12 years. So it's a lot about taking personal accountability in all areas of my life. So I think I have to take that personal accountability for myself. Whether or not I was pursuing, I think I do forgive my younger self for the things that I did because I was completely unaware. I had no intention of like ill will. I was just doing like I felt like I was when pursuing pinup modeling, I was just doing what I saw around me, and it was very normalized in the world I was in. And I think we're at a time where we're really questioning a lot of what happened in the 2000s and seeing that, like, you know, when we look at how we treated Britney Spears or Pamela Anderson, like, it's terrible. And I think what makes a difference is that Gen Z's being able to see us reflect back on these times. So I think they're a lot more aware and like questioning their actions while they're happening instead of after the fact, like I did. I think these conversations allow them to do that more.
When I asked you earlier about kind of how it felt to kind of portray elements of your Asianness in those shoots, you said like it felt really good. Like it was an element of pride. You were proud of yourself. Does your version of yourself today, would you do that differently?
I still love to wear cheap how to events, but I'm not wearing it like for men to be, you know, I knew what those photos were being used for when I was young, and I didn't think it was harmful really. But now we see the objectification of women does really lead to violence in many scenarios. So it's complicated. I feel like, you know, now OnlyFans is very popular and other things like that. And I am a feminist and I never want to judge a woman for their choices. And I think women should be allowed to pursue whatever they want, whether it be sexualized or not. The only thing I think is like, is a 21-year-old able to do OnlyFans and come out of that unscathed mentally? I think it would be very hard.
I want to break down a little bit like what is a fetish versus what is a preference and how you think about that in your life today. Like what is in kind of admiring what an Asian woman looks like versus fetishizing her.
Yeah, a fetish is very distinct. And, you know, there's a lot of Asian women dating white men. And I think most of those are totally fine. I think there's like a portion of the audience out there that thinks I'm against all interracial dating. But it's like, I think most relationships are not fetishized. And I think it's a minority. But a fetishist treats an Asian woman as interchangeable and expects certain behavior like submissiveness, expects sexual subservience. A very good example is there was a viral moment on White Lotus where there was a character who went to Thailand and he was saying like, oh, I slept with thousands of Asian women, all types and sizes, and then eventually discovered this about myself. So it's kind of using the women not as individuals, but as some kind of at service to the man in whatever way it might be.
When it comes to kind of dating and your personal relationships, how do you kind of think about like attraction and who is attracted to you versus who might be fetishizing you? Like how do those questions come into play in your own personal life?
I think for Asian women, it's just so obvious when a guy is fetishy that they stand out quite prominently. And especially when a man has dated, say, like 10 Asian girls in a row, that's like super obvious, I guess. But I don't think most of the men I encounter are fetishy. Like, I do think they are a minority, but very, very strong and like gross minority.
Do you ask people about their former relationships?
That is something I do ask about. Yeah.
So it is like a concern that you have going into dating.
Yeah, that's kind of like the number one one to get over. Like if someone had 5 Asian exes, it would be not like a deal breaker, but definitely a big red flag. So yeah, it is definitely a concern.
We talked about this kind of shift in representation that happened throughout your career. It has only kind of continued to grow, the amount of Asian American representation in media. But I'm curious to know how much you think things have changed in terms of the ways that Asian American women are allowed to be. Like, are they always fetishized and sexualized in the way that they were in the early 2000s?
No, I'm always shocked at the amount of like progress we've made. So much progress still needs to be made, but so much more progress than I could have ever imagined has happened. Never in my life did I imagine that I would be driving along the radio and hearing Korean songs on the radio. That's unbelievable. It's unfathomable to my younger self. And then we have Asian comedians. And then social media really changed things because like there's Asian girls of every walk of life with their own followings. There's Asian teacher girls, Asian scuba diver girls. There are still Asian pinup girls, but they are not the majority of Asian women represented out there. Then there's like television shows like Beef, where like the characters are flawed and multifaceted and not at all sexy. So there's so many examples, I can't even name them all.
You reckon a lot in this memoir with your own responsibility and complicity in fetishizing Asian women. What are some of the kind of steps you hope other people take to think about where and how they might be doing that or how they might have done that in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so important to read other people's experiences. Like I'll read a memoir from somebody who's lived a completely different life because there's things you won't even realize that are fetishy. Like I break down Memoirs of a Geisha in the book, and people who have enjoyed the movie and the book have no idea like the other messages that were coming out of the book that were fetishy or objectification. I think it's just having self-awareness to question yourself live instead of like doing what I did, which is like looking back at myself decades ago. Being like a little more present in your self-reflections.
Like Kaila mentioned, there are now many more role models for Asian femininity than there were a few decades ago. And remember earlier when we talked about sociologist Nancy Wong Yun's long list of problematic Hollywood examples? Well, as a popular culture scholar, she's also been taking note of these newer shifts.
I think that Asian women in Hollywood are gaining more leads, and lead roles tend to be more complex. We have Michelle Yeoh, who became the first Asian woman to ever win a Best Actress Oscar, and she did it for playing an immigrant mother who was multitudes in multiverses. And I don't even think any of those multiverses she was sexualized, which is really cool. She was just a badass. And of course, she was a lead in Memoirs of a Geisha, right? So this is like literally tracing how far even her role has come to be able to go from that role to her role as Evelyn Wong in Everything Everywhere at Once is one way to kind of track the progress. And then we have even someone like Yurin Ha in Bridgerton, which is actually a very sexual role in that all the Bridgertons are very, very steamy. But she is her own romantic lead, right? She has control. And the lens and the gaze is through her eyes, which is very different from the Asian woman who only exists through the white male gaze. So for her for audiences to identify her through her rather than her love interest, her white male love interest, Benedict, I think that is a huge progress in terms of Asian women can be their own sexual beings. So we're not saying that Asian women should only be non-sexual, and we don't want to kind of get rid of that very human part of Asian women. We want them to be the ones in control of their own sexual destinies rather than be the object of someone else's. So I just named 2 roles that were really great, but the most recent UCLA study of the top 200 theatrical films of 2025, only 2 of those leads were Asian women. So even though we have better roles, we need more, a lot more, especially to counter all the bad roles that have come before, because those are still in circulation. People still, I think, believe those. And so we really need a lot more Asian women who are not hypersexualized, as well as Asian women who are maybe sexual beings, but in their own bodies, in their own leads, in their own stories as leads, as protagonists. We need so many more of those stories to counter everything that has existed in Hollywood up to this point.
Nancy teaches ethnic studies at Crafton Hills College in California. And in addition to noting bigger cultural changes, she's also seen her own students think critically about these stereotypes.
I'm a professor. I talk to my students, and and name this, right? I name it. And so that a lot of my students, actually, sometimes my students will say, oh yeah, I have an uncle who's like this. And these aren't even necessarily white dudes. These are other people of color, and they start to critically analyze, okay, so here's the Asian woman talking to me about this, and she's an example of someone who doesn't fit into the stereotype, and I need to actually really think about the stereotype as it exists in my life, in my family's life, all around me. And so through education, I definitely push back on this, because we definitely name hypersexualization of Asian women and compare it to hypersexualization of indigenous women, like Pocahontas, the movie, and we talk about it in terms of Southwest Asian and Middle Eastern, North African women in terms of Orientalism, and so we talk about it in a greater context of how women of color are hypersexualized, and we also specifically think about how Asian and East and Southeast Asian women are seen as prostitutes. And we talk about the Atlanta shooting, and and so all of this, linking that the hypersexualization of Asian women is not okay. It isn't just kind of a fun thing or even something that Asian women welcome. I think that oftentimes people think, well, Asian women being thought of as attractive, is that a bad thing? But of course, like we've talked about, that when Asian women are objectified and not seen as anything else besides temptations, there could be death and violence, and certainly Asian women, the fetishization of people only wanting Asian women because they want them to fit into those stereotypes. It flattens the diversity and the personalities of Asian women across all the different groups. I mean, Asians in general are some of the most diverse groups. We don't share even the same language or religion in terms of countries of origin, and to kind of lump every one of us into one very, very narrow, fetishized, hypersexualized group, it really just takes away all the complexity. And so I definitely want to, through my teaching, and also through just talking to you and just letting people know with who I am and also the history, I think it's so important to help people to step outside of that and be able to critically examine their own biases.
Checking your own biases and unlearning well-trod stereotypes, well, it's daunting. But Nancy has some advice.
So I do this exercise consciously or unconsciously with my daughters, where we just notice when there are historically underrepresented groups that come on screen. And we notice them because they're usually not there. And when they do, we think about, okay, do they fall into stereotypes or do they not? So when folks see an Asian woman come on the screen, are they falling into that trope of the hypersexualized Asian woman? Because that could happen still. And certainly it happens more often when the Asian women have 5 lines or under, or they're just something that is a walk-on. And so I think that when people see that, they must take a pause and think, okay, is this enjoyable to me? Is this funny? Is this problematic? And not to think, okay, this is how all Asian women are. Because there is research that shows that when you don't know any Asian women, for example, in real life, you're going to draw your conclusions about Asian women from the media. Right. So I guess one good thing is to actually get to know and befriend Asian women in real life, or at least talk to some in real life, because I promise you, Asian women are not like that in real life. Or even if they are, fun and sexual, but that isn't all they are. Right. And so I think getting to know Asian women in real life, as well as really coming at all representation with a criticalness, rather than just letting it enter your mind unfiltered and believing things that are really, really old, right? This is just kind of boring, really. The Asian hypersexualized role is so boring. It's so predictable. And it certainly isn't true. I mean, our vice president and presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, she's an Asian woman and she didn't fall into that. We have K-pop demon hunters, right? We have the popularity of cartoons, huge, Oscar winner, the singers, going on stage and singing, and also all the K-pop singers. There's so many ways to consume I think, culture and pop culture that are actually led by Asian women that don't fall into that trope. So there's no excuse not to learn more and enjoy culture produced by Asian women. There's no excuse.
You can find out more about sociologist Nancy Wong Yun and writer Kaila Yu at our website, embodiedwunc.org. You can also find all episodes of Embodied the radio show there and subscribe to our weekly podcast. Today's episode was produced by Kaya Finlay and edited by Amanda Magnus. Sarah Nix provided additional editorial guidance. Adesina Newkirk is our intern, and Jenny Lawson, our technical director. Quilla wrote our theme music. This program is recorded at the American Tobacco Historic District. WUNC is a broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm Anita Rao.